Welcome to this episode on in space. FINS has always been in the forefront of holding discussions and debates on a number of issues that are very important as far as national security and strategic thinking and planning is concerned. As we all know, as the name goes, it is a forum for integrated national security. We plan what is important is an integrated approach towards national security. So today in this episode, we are discussing this issue of in space, the Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. The acronym is in space, which was created in June this year. And it is expected that this creation of the new setup will add great strength to the ongoing successful space programs undertaken by the Government of India. India's space program started in 1962, and it progressed very well within the establishment of Indian Space Research Organization, ISRO, which was again launched in 1969. And the first, 1962, but the first space aircraft, artificial launch satellite was sent in 1975. It was called Aryabhatta. There is and that Aryabhatta was launched from USSR. Then it was USSR, now Russia. There is a small story behind it. It seems there was a talk with the US, and the space satellite was to be launched from US. But in 1971, the man who was looking after this whole program, Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, he died in 1971. So after his death, the entire project was put on hold, and then the whole project restarted again in a fresh manner. Aryabhatta, which was weighing 360 kilograms, it was fitted with extremely great precision instruments, and it was designed to explore the Earth's condition and measure neutrons and gamma rays from the sun, and then conduct investigations in X-ray astronomy. All this was in 1975. So we can imagine the kind of technological power that India had even as far back as 1975. But very unfortunately, if the story goes, experts like Dr. Lele and Professor Arvind Kumar will be able to throw more light on this. The scientific instruments of Aryabhatta had to be switched off on the fifth day in orbit because of the failure of the satellite's electrical power system. But in these 5 days, whatever was collected was so enormous that there was actual jubilation in the scientific community in India. But who would have imagined in 1975 that 40 years from there, India would launch the 109th GSAT-30 communication satellite Ariane 5 VA251 on January 17, 2020. So 1975 to 2020, India successfully launched 109 satellites. But the thing is, as of today, how many satellites must be orbiting? I mean, there is a lot of information about it, but as they say, two intellectuals don't agree on one thing. Two statistics don't agree on one thing. There, according to Statista, there are 4,994 satellites. Out of these, 7 satellites are orbiting the celestial bodies. So 4,994 minus 7 satellites. And out of this, only 2,666 satellites are listed to be active. But in spite of launching 109 satellites in 40 years, India is far behind the tally compared to US, which is supposed to be having 1,308 active satellites. China has got as many as 356 active satellites. Russia has got 167. In fact, after the US and China, the third largest number of satellites are not Russian satellites. The third largest number of satellites are owned by multinationals. Yes, multinational corporations are the third largest owner of satellites. So out of these numbers, if you see the breakup, there are 133 civil satellites, 339 satellites for military purposes, and about 318 satellites are mixed use. And the commercial satellites are 1,440. So, of course, this number can vary a little bit. Another website puts it as 5,774 satellites as on 31st March 2020. But it says, to be very precise, objects launched into outer space as per the register maintained by the United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, UNUSA. But these figures could also change a little bit here and there. So we go by the United Nations figures, which we feel are very correct as far as objects launched into outer space are concerned. But of course, going by these figures, if there are 1,440 commercial satellites, you can imagine it's very evident that the commercial use of satellites are the most viable and profitable investment with a very decent return on investment. Otherwise, multinationals are not going to launch 1,440 satellites. So it is therefore natural that every country wants to put more flying objects into the space, practically crowding it, making it a traffic jam. But the GI-SAT-1, it's a heavy Earth observation satellite developed by the Isro. It was actually due to be launched from GSLV in March 2020, but it got postponed because of some imagery related and problems. This satellite, if had it been launched in March 2020, it would have added a new dimension to our imagery data equipment related to weather, oceanography, meteorology, disaster warning, and it can also perform Earth observation missions with extremely highly temporal resolution. And it is an eye in the sky for India. It would have developed as an eye in the sky for India, which will also enable the military intelligence to receive absolutely critical data about topographic movements in strategic areas like terrorist training camps and military equipment movements in the border areas. But hopefully 2021 we should be able to launch the GI-SAT satellites. But beyond that, besides that, actually India needs to launch more of the X-band synthetic aperture radar, SAR, what is called SAR RISAT 2B Earth observation satellites. These are all dual use capability satellites. And in fact, two of these category satellites launched in 2019 last year has provided enormous data on a number of critical information on the western and northern borders. X-band SAR these satellites operate below 10 gigahertz frequency, and thus they are very ideal for radar applications and are best suited to provide very high resolution imagery. With the advent of 5G technologies and technological upgradation of communication satellites for commercial and social use, you know the amount of social media, whatever we are doing right now is also because of the smaller satellites that we have been able to send into the orbit. And if this has to increase, India will have to launch at least 1,000 more satellites into the orbit. Not just 109, 110, 120, 150. And if we need 1,000 satellites, needless to say, it is beyond the capacity of one establishment called Isro to fulfill the huge demand. In any case, but if you look at the total, it's a $360 billion space market, and private industry's participation is as low as 3%. And out of this 3%, 2% accounts for satellites and launchers. So you can imagine what kind of work we have to do. That is why I think this creation of InSpace, Indian National Space Promotion Authorization Center, it's a new agency under the Department of Space, and this is expected to facilitate and as well as regulate. It will open India's space industry to private sector, but it will also supposed to facilitate and regulate. And this facilitation is going to really become a huge boon. It's a commercial operation. It will fuel manufacturing. It will allow capital formation, and it's a game changer as far as private public participation is concerned and as far as technological improvement is concerned. But of course, there will be a number of issues, teething troubles will be there, both for the government and the private industry, which are likely to participate in these things. So these will be important to look into. Basically, the gestation period for return on investment on a satellite is much greater than any other off-the-shelf product. So it's not that the private industry is going to put 100 crores today and reap 150 crores tomorrow. It's not going to happen that way. The industry will need to have very deep pockets. The experience in emerging economies, and more so in the case of India, is another problem is very frequent and sudden changes in the rules, laws, regulatory framework. As far as satellite launching is concerned, you cannot do this. You cannot have a rule today and suddenly tomorrow morning you change the rule and make it something else. Nobody is going to sink 10,000 crores in launching a satellite if the rules are going to change every day. So anyone who is investing a few millions in satellite will expect a level playing field and also stable investment and taxation rules and regulations for a longer duration. The government will have to set a totally new set of parameters of operation in consultation with the industry, and also give sufficient guarantee of a stable, viable growth model. Another important area of attention will be technology transfer and investments in research and development as far as new innovation and adaptability is concerned. The private industries cannot be expected to do short duration things with ISRO. What ISRO has done in 40 years, private industries cannot do. Our finance minister said that we want to create 100 more ISROs. Actually, what she meant was not creating 100. You cannot create 100 ISROs in 10 days. It has taken 40 years for this ISRO to come to what it has come to today. So it will take time. And another issue will be the utilization of ISRO's launch capacity, technical resource pool, data protection regime, and also subject expertise. All this will have to be shared with the private industry. Of course, we will have to give due regard to proprietary and intellectual property rights, but this will have to be shared with the private industry. How much to share, how to share, what kind of sharing is to be done, what is the intellectual property right protocol, all this will have to be decided on a long-term basis. Capacity building is very important as far as technical field is concerned, and it's a matter of grave concern that ISRO is the only institution which has been doing capacity building. Our universities and higher education facilities in the government as well as private sector has not been able to fill this gap as far as capacity building to international standards are concerned. We have got excellent standards, but we will have to include more universities, especially to do research on these issues. And such a situation cannot remain static for a long time. We will have to have an intervention from the highest authority in this country, right from Prime Minister's level, so that universities and private institutions also join in capacity building. Actually, if you look at the history of India, when ancient India began exploring the space long back, thousands of years back, we went into the origin of the universe. We studied the galaxies. We studied about the stars. We studied about the planets, and so many things we did. But today, modern India is reacting to these, recreating these stories through science and technology, through algorithm, manufacturing skills. That is why Forum for Integrated National Security thought we will do something on this particular subject, which is practically a new subject for a large section of the people, but not very new to people who have joined us today. So I'll first request Dr. Ajey Lele to initiate the subject. Dr. Ajey Lele, as we all know, is the senior fellow in Manohar Parrikar Institute of Defence Studies and Analyses, IDSA. It has been named as Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis. And he also heads the Institute's Center on Strategic Technologies. He began his professional career as Indian Air Force officer, and he took early retirement. He retired as group captain to pursue his academic interest. He holds a master's in physics as well as a master's in MPhil in defense and strategic studies. He completed his doctorate from the School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU. And he has a number of books like the Strategies, Technologies for Military, Asian Space Race, Rhetoric or Reality, Mission Mars. That is another very important book that he has come up. And another book is The Disruptive Technologies for the Military and Security, published by Springer. I'll request Professor Dr. Ajey Lele to begin his.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, even though virtually, to talk to all you people. I can see a very distinguished audience over here, including former Defense Secretary and other people. So I understand that the crowd whom I'm going to speak is a very knowledgeable crowd. So it puts more burden on me to take the subject forward, both into a lucid manner as well as into a slightly political manner. If you've seen the entire debate, which already had been put forward by Professor Chari so eloquently, that there is nothing much more to add because he has covered various areas. But what I will do is that I will go as per the pamphlet which was given, where the seminar was advertised, where the subject for today's talk and discussion was considered as emerging trends and where India stands as far as these emerging trends are concerned. So before getting into the details of emerging trends, I thought that I will spend 1 or 2 minutes at least explaining that how India started all these things. Few years before independence only, everybody had realized that we need to invest into science and technology and other areas of interest if a country has to make a very rapid progress. Hence, immediately after independence, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and scientists like Homi Bhabha, Bhatnagar all came into being, and they started realizing that if you need to make this country more progressive, you need to make investments into science and technology. So we had an origin of a CSIR, then Atomic Energy Commission came in, even DRDO came in as early as 1958. Subsequently, as Professor Chari has already explained, by early 60s, we started making investments into space arena. So for all these years, I can say with good amount of a confidence that all India's political dispensations, irrespective of the party, and technological dispensations have been very proactive as far as the business of space is concerned. And that's why we have realized, that's why we have reached to a position right now when ISRO is considered as one of the game changers as far as the business of space is concerned. Because over the years, ISRO has done a lot amount of activities in a very shoestring budget. And I think that's what ISRO has got a great advantage as far as the rest of the world is concerned. So when we look at India's space program, we did a very nascent beginning, one can say, because it was a learning phase. But we had very good technological leadership at that point in time. Just to quote an example, that we had persons like Professor Vikram Sarabhai, who was one of the excellent scientists who had a command both on nuclear subjects as well as space subjects. So at one point in time, he was heading both the departments or both the laboratories, if I'm saying so, looking at India's nuclear program as well as India's space program. Unfortunately, Professor Sarabhai died pretty early at the age of 52 or 53, and subsequently the baton was passed over to another great scientist called Satish Dhawan. And how the scientific community has actually taken the battle forward, I must make a mention over here for one incident. This is more of an anecdotal incident. India's first satellite launch vehicle, the SLV-3, had a failure. The mission director for this mission was none other than Mr. Kalam. When the mission failed, there was a media standing over there. So he was told, Mr. Kalam was told by Satish Dhawan that since the mission has failed, it is the responsibility of the director of ISRO or the chairman of ISRO to go and meet the press. So he took the entire responsibility of the failure in spite of being Mr. Kalam as a mission director. The second incident happened immediately after a few years when India achieved a success. Again, the mission director was Professor Kalam only. But at that time, it was decided by the chairman ISRO, Satish Dhawan, that now since there is a success as far as this mission is concerned, Mr. Kalam should go and meet the press. So this sort of a technological leadership which we had in India, particularly in the departments of ISRO, that was very forthcoming, and that's why we have reached to a level we have reached now. Another interesting case which I must put in context over here is that it's not only the technological leadership, but the leadership which was associated with administrative powers and how to develop an organization into a world-class organization. I'm not very sure how many of you are aware that T.N. Seshan worked in ISRO for a good number of 9 to 10 years. He was looking at developing this organization from a point of view of administrative reforms. He first worked as a joint secretary, and after a couple of years, he got back to ISRO as an additional secretary also. So if you really look at history of ISRO, you have got an excellent technological leadership, and you had administrators like T.N. Seshan who had put the entire thing into a place. And even today, people say that whatever was given by Seshan, all those activities and all those rules, regulations are being strictly followed. That's the reason ISRO has emerged as an entirely different organization than various other scientific organizations in this country. And because of the autonomy which was existing into the ISRO, even today, a junior scientist can challenge the findings of a senior scientist. That sort of a system is operating over there. It's a very transparent atmosphere, and we all have seen what sort of a dividends all it has been given. So when one looks at ISRO's program, initially our focus was on agriculture, on education. Obviously, India being an agriculture economy, you wanted to know more about climate and weather. Hence, your investments were into the satellites where you will get certain amount of inputs as far as climate and weather are concerned. Again, Sarabhai's dream was to use satellite technology by TVs to reach to the farthest parts of the country where you can provide certain amount of education. So this is what the beginning which ISRO did. Subsequently, we started making investments into remote sensing satellites. One of the major game changers as far as ISRO is concerned, because today I think ISRO is holding one of the biggest networks of remote sensing satellites. Again, our focus was socio-economic development only, and I think till date our focus continues to remain as far as ISRO is concerned, mainly on socio-economic development. Somewhere down the line in the year 2005 or 2006, there was a meeting of 50 top scientists in the country in Bangalore. And that point in time, it was decided that ISRO needs to have a mid-course correction. So we continued to have our activities on a socio-economic development, but we decided to venture slightly more. The challenge was that ISRO scientists should have more challenging opportunities. Otherwise, the scientific community also gets stagnated because they do a very routine job of sending transponders, communication satellites, and other satellites. So at that point in time, the decisions were taken that we can look at Moon, we can look at Mars, we can even think of undertaking human mission to the space. So subsequently, now you can see over a period of time, all these sorts of activities have reached to a certain amount of a conclusion, one may say. So sticking to the title of the seminar, that is the emerging trends, I think if I have to identify the emerging trends, I will try to identify them at three levels. One is at a scientific level, other is at an economic level, and third is at a military level, because these are the basic trends which are visible right now. If I have to look at a scientific level, ISRO has made investments into satellites like astro satellites, essentially contributing greatly to the astrophysics and astronomy as such. We all know that there is a Hubble telescope. India's astrosat is also considered as one of the most potent satellites, which is giving good amount of information about galaxies and other things. Other day only, you must have read in the newspapers that there is a possibility of some sort of a life over the Venus. Now, this has come now into the papers, but India has already decided that yes, we will not only restrict ourselves to look at Moon and Mars, but we are going to look at Venus also. So there is always a project which is undergoing as far as ISRO is concerned about the mission to the Venus is also concerned. So if I'm looking at a scientific exploration of a space, ISRO has made investments into astrosats. So definitely that activity is going to continue. We want to know more, not only about our own planet, but about the entire planetary systems and an intrastellar system also. Then we are looking at Moon and Mars very seriously. We have succeeded with our first Moon mission. Second Moon mission, we had certain amount of, one can say, difficulties of making a robotic landing on the surface of the Moon. But I'm sure with Chandrayaan 3 coming up in a couple of months now, we will have a success over there also. Then we have successfully done the mission to the Mars. Now we are going to have a second mission to the Mars in coming few years. So we are making these investments only from a perspective of a science. You see, when you try to reach to these stars and these planets, definitely in the bargain, the technology also develops. There are technologies which could have emerged in the entire process of evolution of all these missions, and these technologies would have further amount of a utility, not only in a space sector, but few other sectors too. Then we have got a plan of sending human to the outer space also. This is a very limited, not very ambitious plan, I must say, but I think one has to start somewhere, and a good beginning will happen when India will send its own astronaut out into the space. Because the only other astronaut who has gone to the space is ex-Air Force officer Rakesh Sharma, and that too way back. Again, if I have to make a mention over here that how political leadership makes a good amount of impact onto your space technologies. When Mr. Morarji Desai was a prime minister, he had made an offer to Brezhnev. Brezhnev had made an offer to Morarji Desai that we were, as a sort of a good relationship between India and Soviet Union, we would like to carry an Indian astronaut on a Russian spacecraft. But Morarji Desai had said that we don't want to accept this, and he had declined this offer. But Mrs. Gandhi took an opportunity when Chio Cohen was made a same set of offer, and that's why today we have an Indian astronaut. At least we can proudly say that we have got one Indian astronaut. Obviously, within coming couple of years, we will have few more Indian astronauts when our Gaganyaan projects comes to a completion. Then we have got plans of establishing our own our own space station, something akin to International Space Station. But International Space Station is a gigantic project. There are 15, 16 countries involved into it. We will have as a very small beginning, but a good beginning will be made. So definitely India will have, as far as science is concerned, a very good beginning out into the space. So the trends, if I'm looking at, India is going to make these sorts of investments in a very systematic, in a methodical fashion, but not extremely ambitious fashion, because we have got certain amount of limitations as far as budget constraints are there. So I will say that the emerging trends as far as science and technology are concerned out into the space, India will be continuing with its missions to the planets. India will continue with its missions where human element will be involved into it. India will have astrophysics associated with various missions. Then there are a few other projects also which are not in a pipeline but could be thought of, like using space for the purposes of energy. There is a space power concept which is already existing. So few other concepts like this could be evolved over a period of time. Then there is something which is known as a space situational awareness. India has already got one odd satellite which is giving them certain amount of idea of what is happening out into the outer space. Because you see, whatever happens on the surface of the earth is known to us. but we have got no eyes out into the space where we will come to know about the activities. Just to give you an example, when North Korea conducts a nuclear test, the entire world comes to know about it because of the seismographic equipments which are available in various laboratories all over the world. But when China did an anti-satellite test and the space was flooded with space debris, none of us were able to know about it, because we only came to know about it when USA told to the rest of the world, because USA only have got that sort of a system available which can monitor what is happening out into the space. So India also is very keen to develop a system, something like this, may not be on their own, maybe a joint venture, collaborative venture with various other agencies also. Uh, Other area where India is looking at a space and the emerging trends are very helpful is that India is trying to use space for the purposes of a diplomacy also. South Asia satellite launched by India a few years back is a case in point. Then India has developed its own navigational network, the NAVIC system. Again, we want to give the NAVIC rights also to our neighbors, the SAARC countries. So India is interestingly using space as a part of a diplomatic tool also. Even during BRICS summit, if you have seen, India has said that yes, we are ready to share the data with the rest of the world. So India is using space for diplomatic as a tool for diplomacy also. Now coming to economic aspects of it, just a couple of months back, certain amount of announcements were made by the finance minister about the strategic reforms into the 8 sectors. These are all important sectors: minerals, coal, atomic energy, so on and so forth. And space is also a very important sector which has been announced by the Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman, where she has said that we want to have more amount of investments out into the space. There are 2 policy decisions which have been taken by India now. One is that as far as the geospatial data is concerned, India is going to make that data available to the Indian agencies. For all these years, Indian agencies were deprived of this data, but now that data will be made available to them. Otherwise, Indian agencies, the private sector agencies and few other agencies were going to the foreign vendors and purchasing that data at a very heavy cost. So this is a very great, I can say, a policy step which has been taken. Other thing is that as far as testing facilities are concerned, ISRO has decided that it will allow the private industry to use its testing facilities. You see, for any small organization, it could be an easier option to build a satellite, develop a satellite. But that organization is not in a position to do or undertake all types of testings over there. The reason is that you require huge amount of investment, huge amount of scientific know-how to create testing facilities. So a startup business in India in the domain of a space can only survive if the testing facilities are made available to them. And I think this is again a very important decision which has been taken recently, where these facilities are being made available. So if the startup initiative has to come forward, there has to be a good amount of hand-holding done by the ISRO. All over the world, everybody says that SpaceX is a very interesting experiment and privatization of a space has happened because of the SpaceX. But one must understand that there is a lot amount of a hand-holding done by NASA as far as SpaceX is concerned. Even NASA gives them testing facilities for them. So SpaceX success is definitely a very commendable success, and one must take certain amount of inspiration from SpaceX and other space companies also. But one must understand that at end of the day, all these agencies have come up in their entire structures and other sort of technical activities only because they have good amount of support from NASA, both from a technological perspective as well as they are giving them certain amount of projects also. So good amount of money is also flowing in. So ISRO has got now that responsibility that if the entire setup of a private industries has to come up as far as India is concerned, then ISRO has to do a handholding, and government of India also have to give certain amount of financial benefits to these agencies. Otherwise, these agencies will only stay on the papers, and they will have certain amount of business which is only been given to them by ISRO. Idea is that the business has to grow and it should not get restricted to ISRO. Today, if you see, if ISRO undertakes any launch for that matter of a satellite, almost 70 to 75% of the work is done by the private industry. you have got a lot of small scale industries which are in and around Bangalore and Hyderabad region who are doing a lot amount of jobs for ISRO. One interesting aspect I need to make a mention over here is that HAL also contributes in a very significant fashion as far as creating the structures for ISRO satellites and other launch vehicles are concerned. So ISRO has to do a good amount of a hand-holding for the private agencies. Government has to give certain amount of a concessions because particularly the aerospace business, where if you invest money today, it is said that at least for a decade, you should expect that you will not even cut even. So to start earning profits may take some 15th or 20th year of you making investments into these industries. So until and unless we ensure that these industries do not have that sort of a sustenance power, there is no charm in allowing these industries to grow. And again, one has to allow these industries to do certain amount of exports also, because only looking at ISRO as one client is not going to sustain. I think that is what is a problem with India's defense industry also. Only if you depend on India's Indian Army, Indian Air Force as your client, and if you're not allowed to export, then there is going to be a problem. Because if the particular client says that I don't require this component today onwards, then the entire architecture which has been developed by a private industry for production of that component goes for a waste. So I think one has to learn something from India's defense industry setup also, as far as developing a new space agency as far as ISRO is concerned. Then let me come to the last point, that is in the military arena, what are the trends which are available? You see, over the years, particularly after the 1991 Gulf War, everybody has understood that space is an extremely important component as far as military is concerned. Uh, what is space offering to the military? Space is offering to the military a very good communication network. Space is offering to the military a reconnancy, what we call in a military parlance, basically a network of Earth observation and remote sensing satellites. India has already developed these sorts of networks, particularly India's Cartosat series satellites. The networks are very remarkable, which is giving good amount of a service as far as armed forces are concerned. And thirdly, the navigational network, because all these years we were depending on a GPS, and GPS offers a degraded signal as far as other agencies are concerned. So if you require a military quality signal, you need to have your own infrastructure available, and we have completed our project, what we are calling that as a NAVIC of a 7 satellites, which is essentially providing the facilities as far as satellite navigation is concerned to India and adjoining regions. So as far as military is concerned, these are the 3 important components. Then you require a certain amount of policy prescriptions also over here. We started with a small cell called a space cell into integrated defense staff. Subsequently, we reached to a level now of establishing a space defense agency. I think as far as space defense agency is concerned, we need to restrict ourselves, asking that agency to look at all these elements which are required for the military. If I have to use a military word, I will say that space is a force multiplier for the military. Because modern day aircrafts, you purchase a 5th generation aircraft, then you definitely require a good navigational system too. So modern day equipment, whether it is an aircraft or a tank or a submarine for that matter, you require a certain amount of a connectivity with the outer space, and that connectivity is being created by ISRO. In the year 2013, ISRO had launched a satellite for Indian Navy called Rukmini. 2 years back, a satellite was launched for Indian Air Force also. A dedicated satellite for Indian Army is going to it is going to be a reality in 1 or 2 years, and even we are planning a satellite for your paramilitary forces also. So as far as these requirements are concerned, we are doing pretty okay. More needs to be done, particularly in the area of intelligence gathering, because these polar satellite launch, these polar orbiting satellites, they are not able to give you 24/7 visibility for entire Chinese region and entire Pakistan region. You require many more satellites needs to be launched. Definitely, it can't be a situation where we will be able to cover the entire borders of India based on satellites on a 24/7, but we need to do certain amount of intelligent investments, and there are few projects which are in the pipeline as far as these activities are concerned. Then the other activity, in fact, today's Times of India is only reporting that China had blocked India's signals a couple of years back. They are reporting the report is based on some US think tank report which is looking at China's space activities exclusively. So what China has achieved in these last 2-3 years is to do certain amount of a cyber jamming of India's space ground infrastructure. That's what the report is saying. I'm not getting into the authenticity of the report, whether it is right or wrong, but I think this is one area where India needs to be very careful, and India needs to have a system which will allow India in a passive fashion to ensure that India's all equipment is not damaged because of any sort of a cyber activity and other activities. And at the same time, India needs to have a very official position also. And I think we have taken a very, I will say, a proactive position when we did Mission Shakti just a year back, when we had destroyed our own satellite by using our own kinetic kill vehicle. I think this is a feather in the cap as far as DRDO is concerned, because damaging the satellite is not a job of a ISRO. Putting a satellite into the space is job of a ISRO. But to create a damage to a satellite definitely is a job of a DRDO. So one has to do that sort of a nuanced differentiation when one is talking of anti-satellite weapons and other sort of activities. Today, what I can find is happening is that armed forces are overburdened because of various other tasks. Recently, if you see, United States has also come out with a separate vertical as far as space is concerned, because tomorrow's warfare is expected to be a warfare out into the space, and one has to look at the space in a very serious fashion. And already we have started seeing what sort of activities which are happening out into the space. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but the way China and particularly Russia also are making investments into counter space capabilities, one needs to have a different type of infrastructure to look at these issues. To use a space as a force multiplier, to have an agency like Defence Space Agency is understandable. But when you get into the zone of a space warfare, I think a time will come, may not be today or tomorrow, maybe after 10 years or so, but India will definitely have to have a separate vertical for this. That means if I am saying that as an emerging trend, I will say that after Indian Army, Indian Navy, Indian Air Force, you will have to have a fourth vertical for Indian Space Force also. So this is the way I am trying to look at the activities which are happening. As far as new space is concerned, which is a very interesting initiative which has been taken up by the government. But trust you me, India is only right now having 2% of the activities as far as outer space is concerned, when I'm talking of a business activities. So if India needs to do a business as far as outer space is concerned, India needs to grow beyond than the existing networks. We need to grow beyond not only restricting our activities where ISRO is involved in any activity as far as these things are concerned. We need to have certain amount of a collaborative efforts with other space agencies too. We need to have certain amount of a collaborative agents with not only space agencies of the states, collaborative efforts with other agencies now like SpaceX. Then you got various other agencies in the world who are doing a private business. So it's not necessary that you should always have a public-private enterprise. You can have a private-private enterprise also. You can, because India has got a geographical advantage as far as launching systems are concerned. So if you are planning to have one more launch pad, which is going to be there somewhere in Puducherry or adjoining areas, that's what the plan is, then definitely India will be in an advantageous position. So now if you are to actually make the investments into space business and evolve a major space business model, then you need to make investments not only into production of a satellites, not only into launching of a satellites, but ensuring that we offer facilities for a good infrastructure on ground also. So these are the all areas which I feel are important. And looking at the present trends, I'm very hopeful that India will do much better out into the space. Not only with ISRO, but with India's private industry also. This is where I will stop. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Lele, for that. In fact, thank you for pointing out about the subject. You have brought the whole discussion back to the real subject that we had given. And especially your mention about the scientific level and technological level was very good. This idea of force multiplier is also a very important point. And as you have said, we have multi-agency coordination is also required. And Indian Space Force is something that's a novel idea. I'm sure Government of India must be listening, and they must have started working on it. It's a wonderful intervention that you have made here. We have Professor Arvind Kumar now. As we all know, Professor Arvind Kumar is heading the Department of Geopolitics and International Relations in Manipal University, and his entire career has been with the whole study of nuclear as well as space programs. Professor Arvind Kumar was also with, he started with IDSA. He was also working in NIAS under Dr. Raja Ramanna, and from NIAS he has moved over to Manipal University. And as we all know, he has a number of publications also, but more importantly, he was also the visiting fellow at Henry Stimson Center, Washington, D.C. He was also the postdoctoral fellow at Sandia National Laboratories, USA, and visiting research scholar at the Institute of International Studies at Stanford University. He was APISA IDSS Fellow at the Institute of Defence and Strategic Studies at Nanyang Technological University, Singapore. And he was also appointed as visiting fellow at the University of New South Wales, Sydney, for 3 years. His research interest, of course, includes the areas of strategic capabilities of China and Pakistan, nuclear doctrines and strategy, nuclear weapons and delivery system, and India's internal security issues, ballistic missile defense, space security, global security, export control regimes, and so many other matters relating to India's foreign policy. And it's very important to mention that he was the member of high-level committee constituted by Government of India on research and development in national security. He has been a member of the editorial board of a number of journals, including UNISCI discussion papers, which is published by University of Spain, Madrid. He has also been the member of the advisory board of Contemporary Indian Program of University of Warsaw, Poland, and he is a member of International Studies Association as well as European International Studies Association. Besides that, he has been part of the board of studies of a number of universities even in India, including Central University of Kerala, Central University of Jharkhand, and Goa University. He has been very, very strongly and deeply associated with Forum for Integrated National Security. He presented his paper on in Goa on the same issue which we are discussing now. That is the second program which FINS conducted in Goa on the Sagar 2 initiative and on space. Much of the information which I presented in my introductory remark are all directly lifted from the papers that he submitted. Very incidentally, what the Government of India has done now in 2020, it was part of a paper submitted by Dr. Arvind Kumar as far back as I think 210 or 211. So you can imagine the kind of knowledgeable repository of knowledge that Professor Arvind Kumar is. I will request Professor Arvind Kumar to present his views. Over to you, Professor Sam.
Thank you very much for a very kind introduction, and thank you for this invitation. I really thank Advocate Baldesai for inviting me to this very timely discussion on a very relevant and significant theme. I am also delighted to see the formerly chairman of ISRO, Shri Kumar, and listening to this particular panel. I am really delighted to see you, sir. Very, very good morning to you. And also delighted to see the formerly Defense Secretary, Mr. Sekhar Dutt. So, as you have heard these two very excellent presentations by Shri Chari and Dr. Ajey Lele, I was just thinking that what is it that has been left for me? I think everything has been covered. So, what I will do, I will just highlight certain salient issues which India has experienced, and through those experiences in India's space program, what is it that India has been articulating to achieve in the foreseeable future? And what are those emerging trends which suggest that yes, India really has been attempting to achieve primacy in outer space? I think we have roughly a history of 6 decades of the developments in outer space since the launch of that Sputnik in 1957. And certainly in the last 6 decades, it really has been seen as the major area for debate and discussion in strategic studies. Outer space really has come up with a new dimension in geopolitics. It can't really be understood unless and until one sees that what are those areas of larger concern which have emanated. I think most of the focus in the last 6 decades, if one really looks into, obviously had been, from the global point of view, on the strategic domain. And there's no denying the fact. I think all the figures and everything have already been told by Mr. Chariji, and Dr. Ajey Lele also very excellently really spoke about what were those challenges which really have outer space had experienced. But what I would like to say that the relevance and significance of outer space was very well understood by 2 of the formerly superpowers during the decade of 60s itself. And they were able to really harness the potential of outer space, whatever advances they saw really to achieve during those decades. I think they really achieved a large number of space-based assets which they deployed for harnessing the potential of outer space. There's no denying the fact that India certainly has been able to achieve a significant amount of success. But I'm not going to compare India vis-a-vis China or India vis-a-vis the US, because we certainly have been spearheading our programs in the context of our requirements. There's a thing called competition, despite the fact that outer space certainly has raised a lot of contest and competition among the major powers. So if you see the larger relevance of space technologies, they really have played a very crucial role in communication system. Improvement in the communication system has been tremendous. In broadcasting, in navigation capabilities, in remote sensing, in education sector, disaster management. So anything which you name, surveillance system, or for that matter, even if you take the climate change, maritime security, environmental monitoring, I think every area you see that outer space is the key. So the domain of outer space really has become very, very important, not only for India, but for a number of nations across the globe. And the countries really have been competing to achieve primacy in this particular region. And obviously, India has been able to emerge as a leading spacefaring nation. And since I said that the space technology has made significant contributions, obviously, one of the things which Dr. Lele has highlighted about the scientific knowledge, the creation of that knowledge has helped to understand the larger, relevance of this outer space. Then again, how it has helped to maintain national security, and for that matter, global security. And that has really happened. How it has been able to force international cooperation. That is happening, and a lot of examples are there. And obviously, how it has also created a very unstable outer space. And that is what is the current debate, which is called weaponization of outer space, which again, the US really has been taking the lead. The ballistic missile defense technology obviously uses outer space, especially in terms of finding the technical feasibility of that capability, because it provides 2 types of freedom to attack and freedom from attack. And because of that, again, the whole outer space is being seen getting weaponized by the United States. And obviously the other countries, as you know, the very fact that India also has been a part of that league after demonstrating anti-satellite capability, obviously is in some way is looking towards being a part of that big league. So India has done fairly well. I will be optimistic. India has done fairly well since the creation of ISRO, despite all the limitations ISRO had to work under the sanctions, to work under the very limited budget, and by international standard, the budget of ISRO has all the time been low. I think if you see, ask me that what is the current budget, I think it has never crossed $3.5 billion to $4 billion. And in that budget, the amount of success which India really has shown and has reflected, the rest of the world, really, they feel surprised at how India has achieved so many things in such a limited budget. And that factor again has to be taken into account. India's presence in low Earth orbit obviously has been increasing because the low Earth orbit are very effective for maintaining surveillance and reconnaissance. And the decade of 60s in particular, when the whole idea and the debate of that how outer space was being militarized. Militarization of outer space is nothing but how a country uses their space-based assets in improving the intelligence information gathering mechanism, maintaining surveillance, and also reconnaissance. As you know, the US pioneered reconnaissance, spying through satellites. They came up with that national technical means, and that really was a great part of the debate during the peak of the Cold War. And obviously, the type of the military satellites which they deployed, especially satellites for the military application, that was again as a part of competition with the formerly Soviet Union. A time had come in outer space when there were 3,000 dedicated military satellites deployed by both the US and the formerly Soviet Union. And that is something which one has to consider, that how they have achieved, because their overall requirement was different. The US wanted to maintain a global surveillance system. So likewise, India's presence in both low Earth orbit and geosynchronous orbit, they really have been increasing. And obviously the pace at which the rest of the world, obviously the US or Russia or China, the way they have evolved or got unfolded in having their capabilities in outer space, India should not compare with them. India has to compare, or India has to articulate as per its requirements, what does India want to do in outer space? And how is through that limited capabilities, India really has been able to harness the potential of outer space. So again, the developments at the global scale, the US remains preeminent in outer space. So there is no denying the fact. China certainly has been a spearheading. China certainly is roughly 20 years behind the United States in outer space. India is 20 years, or you can say 15 years behind China in outer space. So these are all comparable things to really take some parameters and analyze that what is it that China has been doing, what is it India has been doing. But overall ambition which India has, that is getting reflected, and obviously India has been a spearheading towards that direction. And that is how best India can enhance its overall capabilities, because the demand is growing. And since the demand is growing, India obviously has to find other way, especially in the context of having the existing capabilities used and see that how that can really get expanded into a number of different areas, and that could really aid to India's overall requirement. So ISRO's capabilities, whatever ISRO has achieved in the last 50 years, that is now going to be harnessed by the other private players. And that is what is the emerging trend. The creation of inner space, that again is something to see that how the private sector participation will be increasing. In a space, Indian National Space Promotion and Authorization Center. The mandate of this is going to be that how it will assess and assess the needs and demands of the private players, including educational and research institutions. I think the mandate is quite open, broad-based. At the same time, the how that, in fact, ISRO can really aid to this private player in really fulfilling to the larger requirement of India. It is nothing new. Public-private partnership debate has started way back in the early part of 90s. And somehow it is taking a shape. As you know that a lot of the debates had happened, especially during the later part of 90s also, that how best there can be a very robust public-private partnership. And this whole exercise of inviting private players in really expanding the overall capabilities of ISRO, using that capabilities and harnessing that capability in the fullest extent possible manner, and how that capability can really be enhancing India's overall role in outer space is the main focus of India in the current context. So existing ISRO infrastructure, if you see, both ground and space-based scientific and technical resources, these again are going to be used especially in the context of enhancing the overall role for India in outer space. And data, whatever data exists, that also will be made accessible to interested parties to enable them to carry out their space-related activities. So again, a lot of these discussions and debates which are happening right now, especially in the context of how the private players can really come in a big way, again, that assessment has been done mainly to see that how their role increases in the foreseeable future. A large number of manufacturing and fabrication of rockets and satellites now are happening in private sector. But how that can be streamlined, how that can really be used to really enhance India's potential in outer space. So that is the focus of India right now. And as was pointed out, India's, I think Indian industry has only 3% share in a rapidly growing global space economy. If you see global space economy, that perhaps will speak volume. That what does the global space economy speak about India's place in that economy? I think that is pretty low. If you see the overall, the volume of global space economy, it is touching to roughly 375 billion US dollar. And that is something which, again, you have to see that how Indian industry, how that can really enhance India's share in the global space economy. And that is what is required in the current juncture in enhancing India's potential. And that could really obviously add value to the overall global space economy volume. 2% of this market, whatever exists, especially in terms of India's role in the global space economy, 2% of this market has been for rocket and satellite launch services, which require fairly large amount of investment and obviously a good infrastructure. So I think industry in India as of now acts only as the suppliers of components and the various subsystems. How that role of industries can really get enhanced. So I think it should not really remain only as the supplier for the various components and also the subsystems which are required to build the rockets and the various other aspects, how that the whole role of industry can get changed. The other thing is that the question which comes, especially when you assess the feasibility of the role of private players, and that question is, does Indian industries have the resources or the relevant technology to undertake independent space projects on the patterns of the US companies like SpaceX? So if again, the whole idea is that the SpaceX really came up in a different context altogether. And the US from day one emphasized and found the relevance of private sector, and they've really trusted private sector in a manner which really have given a lot of dividends to the US space industry. That really somehow India could not understand in the early part of its development. India totally banged on this ISRO, and obviously that was a good step to build capacity, but now the things again are getting unfolded in a different direction. In India, what has happened, the demand for a space-based application and services, that demand is increasing. And in that context, the whole question is that how ISRO would be able to find ways and mechanism to work in commensurate with the growing demand. And that is where ISRO is finding that how best ISRO can really work with the different private players. And as you know, that statement which had come, which was again in a different context, when the finance minister said that there should be 100 of mini ISROs in the foreseeable future. I think that the statement again has to be seen in the larger context, that how India really can build mini ISROs. That is not the idea. Idea is that how the rest of the private players can really harness the potential of ISRO and enhance India's overall space capabilities, enhance India's space-based assets in outer space, both in the low Earth orbit and geosynchronous orbit. That is the whole focus. It's not that question of creating alternate ISRO. It's not like that. That was misunderstood by Indian media. I think that has to be taken into account, that how ISRO's potential can be harnessed by these private players. And ISRO really has been opening up. The best part is I find a difference here which I want to correlate. Department of Atomic Energy in India and ISRO, they really are different in many ways. Because Department of Atomic Energy still is not willing to accept that they need to amend the Atomic Energy Act to really have the participation for private players. At least ISRO is opening up, accepting this fact, creating in a space that itself suggests that ISRO is a very, I don't know, I think it's opening up and finding a lot of ways and mechanism to help the private players and see that how their role gets increased. Because a lot of these needs which are coming, especially for having the satellite data, having the imageries, and again, overall space technology, and all these things again is needed. So private companies, they really have to be coming up in a big manner. Lot of these existing capabilities of ISRO or existing infrastructure of ISRO obviously are going to be used by these players. This is what again is the understanding given by the ISRO in a space creation. And all launches from India basically are happening on ISRO rockets that is called PSLV, and that carry the satellites and the other payloads into a space. How that can be used by the private players? It's not that private players are expected to go and just build a alternate to the Sriharikota that testing range. I think that launch center. But obviously, if some private players are willing to build a launch center, they are most welcome to do that, because ISRO obviously has committed through in a space that they would provide land for building those capabilities and building those launch pads. So I think ISRO has been showing a lot of willingness to accommodate private players after getting their projects approved by InnerSpace. I think the process again will be not that tedious to get their projects approved by InnerSpace, but that process is very much important, especially in the context of getting these private players interested in enhancing their overall potential which they have so far in the outer space sector. So private companies obviously are most welcome in adding value to the existing resources of outer space. So InnerSpace is supposed to be a facilitator. So it is going to be a facilitator and obviously to an extent regulator. So again something which is very crucial in the current context for the private players, that how best they can really keep a lot of these bureaucratic hurdles away, because the private sector finds bureaucratic hurdles as an obstacle for their ambitions to be realized, and how that can really be getting rid of obstacles, I think is being debated in the current context. So as per my assessment, InnerSpace has become some sort of an interface between ISRO and private sector, and that again is going to be a very important development in India's context in the current scenario. How ISRO is going to gain, how India is going to gain by enhancing the role of private players, I think that is what is a very important part of debate. How ISRO will gain? I think ISRO should not restrict only its role for launching weather and communication satellites. I think some of the work which ISRO has been doing for decades, that has to be obviously transferred to the private players, and ISRO can really be involving itself largely in fulfilling to the larger mission. And these missions, as you know, which ISRO has a plan, mission to observe the sun, a mission to the moon, a human space flight, a human landing on the moon. So a lot of these things are in the queue. So it's not that ISRO basically has to just keep spending its resources and keep doing the things by just launching the weather and navigational or communication satellites. It has different purpose altogether now, and those really need to be expanded. It's question of how the expertise, the capabilities which ISRO has got in the last 50 years, how that has to be used largely in the context of the changing dimension of geopolitics. I think a lot of these knowledge which has been created at ISRO really have to be imparted to the private players, and how that private players can really be able to aid to the overall requirement of India. I am not going to define what numbers India would require to really have the larger data or have the larger navigational capabilities or having the communication capabilities or really for the weather prediction. But the only thing I will say that the overall requirement of India obviously has been growing. Last year, again, one new institution has been created, and this is called New Space India Limited. And this New India Space Limited is nothing but an institution, as per my understanding, is a replica of the existing Antrix Corporation. And somehow it has to market the technologies developed by ISRO. So I see a lot of overlaps between New Space India Limited and Antrix Corporation, especially in the context of these many new ideas coming in ISRO. I think this should be looked into largely in the context of that how NSIL again would change the overall pattern of marketing the technologies developed by ISRO. So I think once the private players' role will increase, that again would see that how that would really be seen a factor emerging in a bigger manner. That would be a space commerce. I think a space commerce, I think, is yet to take off in India's context. The way it has taken a larger, it has a huge, dimension. It's a huge width created in the United States. And a SpaceX is a good example to understand the space commerce. So I think a space commerce is going to be a major part of focus from these many changes, which are going to really, I think in India, in foreseeable future, India will experience. And through this exercise, I think India will certainly be able to cope up with its requirement, as well as the role of private sector would aid to the overall growth of India's space industry. And that certainly would really bring India on the top of radar screen when India has to be seen as a responsible player or responsible power in the international system. So I would like to stop it here because I don't want to replicate whatever already has been spoken. I would like to just emphasize on a single point that the role of private sector in the foreseeable future is going to be very crucial for India's rising power ambition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Arvind Kumar. Your last punchline that India's private sector has a very major role to play is really music to ears for everybody. And that is the whole idea with which this whole thing has been brought out, especially connecting it with Atmanirbhar Bharat. And you have very rightly pointed out about the two important issues that ISRO faced, the sanctions and the budgetary constraints. So if ISRO has been able to do it in just $4 million, and in spite of the sanctions, and I must point out here that in fact
$4 billion.
$4 billion.
Billion.
Yeah. So I'm just reading out from a paper which Professor Arvind Kumar prepared almost 10 years back, if I'm not mistaken, sir.
20 years, 2001.
My God, 2001, 20 years back. And 20 years back, what he had said at that time is about the role of private industry. Even at that time, the private industry had contributed to the manufacture of some of the most critical components for ISRO. And not only that, according to his paper, which was prepared in 2001, he has said that the cryogenic engine project also was partnered with the private industry. 38% of the contribution of private industry to the launch vehicle production, and 62% of Lakshya production in private sector. So these are, and Dynamic Technologies Limited had prepared certain parts and all that. And these are all some of the information that was available to Professor Arvind Kumar in the year 2000. So it is practically 20 years back that he has prepared this paper. So he is 20 years ahead of the present government of India. And I fully recognize the fact that both Dr. Ajey Lele and Dr. Arvind Kumar have very important lecture series. They are both part of the academic councils in their respective universities. and both have got a next academic session to be carried forward in the next 10 minutes. So I won't detain them for long. It's a very great honor that we have people like Dr. Kiran Kumar part of this seminar, Dr. Bhujang Rao, and Dr. Dilip Sathe, and Dr. Shekhar Dutt, former IB chief. And we have a huge amount of people, more than 70 to 80 people who have joined, who have been part of this session. And obviously it calls, this whole exercise, I think, will call for another similar program, which we will have to do very soon, so that other aspects which both our speakers today have raised will also be included. And we will, not only that, we will very soon try to bring out a volume based on the lectures.
I just wanted to add on just 2-3 points what our distinguished speakers have already said. So if you just allow me.
Yes, please go ahead, sir.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm Shekhar Dutt speaking. These two speakers and Dr. Chari before them, they have really put all the gamuts of what can be done by space. I'll just add a little bit for your consideration. And one is the field of education. Distance education is a very large requirement, because it can take India's not only training but also knowledge to places where we don't have access to university education or even re-education, which is very much required. So distant education is a very, very important field. In fact, EduSat was launched a few years, and we should fully utilize EduSat and perhaps other satellite capacities. Along with it, what India did was to also see the possibility of telemedicine. So telemedicine, using satellites for medicine, because here large number of people at distant places and the specialized hospitals or specialized doctors are not available. So they are seeing, and then at a central place certain information is kept, so other doctors they share this knowledge, and thereafter the way the treatment should be on. In fact, because of artificial intelligence, even surgery can be directed by satellite. And the third thing I think is a very important field, and that is much larger use of our GPS. I mean, GPS replacement. India has to do GPS replacement, and therefore navigation and direction finding satellites, Geosat, these are important. And as somebody has already said, that you require a triangular, you require 3 satellites minimum at all given points of time at 24 hours, so that all the 3 services and also national highways, we should be able to use the space. Fourth is, I think Dr. Arvind Kumar has mentioned, private-private partnership. I would suggest that this private-private partnership should allow new consortiums to develop. You know, suppose a private enterprise has got a strength in X, another private enterprise has got strength in Y. So X plus Y plus Z, these kind of consortiums should be built, and they should work in tandem and help Isro in taking up the larger national issues. And fifth is new inventions, because earlier inventions were done by because they were denied. But in order to be totally Atmanirbhar, and especially in this area, we must search out and create new equipment. And there, this example of cryogenic engine is a very, very important example. But there can be so many others which the space scientists would be able to identify. There, we must identify 21st century, second half of the 21st century, new areas where inventions should be made by Indians. Thank you very much, Dr. Chari. It's a very, very
Thank
useful.
you. Thank you, sir. All the very important points you have mentioned about EduSat, of course, I still remember once I visited IGNOU and did a program on EduSat, and there were more than 300 schools, all tribal schools, which participated.
Yeah.
So you can imagine the amount of education that we can give, and especially after this coronavirus pandemic. I mean, even this particular seminar which we are conducting right now is through a satellite program. And if 100 students can join this program, and if 100 universities can be part of such programs, I think I can really imagine the kind of thing we can do. Actually, this whole program is being coordinated from the Mumbai office, and I think the time limit or some problem is there. So I would really like to conclude here, and I'm really extremely thankful to both Dr. Ajey Lele and Dr. Arvind Kumar. Both of them agreed for accepted this program practically on my email invitation. I should have, I did not even speak to them. Even before I could speak, they said, yes, well done, we are on. So they are always associated with FINS on all these programs. And we would really look forward to their participation because they are both experts on the subject. Whatever I have learned in this 1 hour program is really absolutely wonderful. And we will also keep this program in the next 15 days cycle. We will have the follow-up of this program and try and get people who have been involved in private sector, and people from the private sector who have already been associated with Isro and these projects, and how they look at the whole problems and what are their expectations. So this would probably be the next set of discussion that we would like to have. And I really thank all of you for this wonderful session, and hope to see you all again. Thank you. We conclude here. Thank you.